This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Let's take a look at trade on the markets today. It was a rather dismal day overall for global stocks on the markets today. An anticipated slew of interest rate hikes seemed to drive some of that negative sentiment. South Africa's JSE saw red across its sectors, with the Aussie shaving off almost 0.9%. Nigeria's bourse outdid its continental peers, though. It bucked the trend, closing 0.6% higher. Let's now take a look at other news-making headlines. Crude oil prices soared to the highest in 7 years. Concern in Tanzania over the government's pace of borrowing. And the UN Secretary General calls on business leaders to help poor nations access COVID-19 vaccines and combat climate change. Well, crude oil prices soared to their highest level in over 7 years on Tuesday as geopolitical tension intensified in the Middle East. Brent crude futures rose 1.6% to $87.89 a barrel, with U.S. West Texas Intermediate futures jumping more than 2% to hit $85.56 during early morning deals. Both oil contracts notched their highest level since October 2014 after a subdued trading day on Monday as U.S. markets were closed for a public holiday. Prices have been rising from lows of $6 to $8 a barrel at the beginning of December as demand remains strong, unperturbed by the rapid spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19, even as global supply remained tight. The attack by Yemen's Houthi group on United Arab Emirates on Monday and the possibility of a retaliation by the latter has only added to the upside that experts say may continue. Well, in Nigeria, 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery, located in the commercial city of Lagos, is expected to commence operations this year. When it does, it will not only be the largest refinery in Africa, but also the world's biggest single facility. And now, as Deji Badmosi reports from Lagos, Nigeria is pinning its hope on the refinery to end refined petrol imports and address its foreign exchange challenge.
The 650,000 barrels per day oil refinery is virtually the biggest construction project in Nigeria at the moment. The refinery has a petrochemical plant with a capacity of producing 900,000 tons of polyethylene and polypropylene granules per year. It's a big deal, according to the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, and would help the country conserve much-needed foreign exchange.
Nigeria's annual consumption of polypropylene and polyethylene granules is less than 200,000 tons. What does that mean? By contribution in import content, again FX content, that is close to about 5% of our imports.
Nigeria imports virtually all the refined petrol it consumes due to inadequate domestic refining capacity, and the import takes about 30% of the country's foreign exchange. This is in addition to the billions of dollars the government spends in subsidizing the cost of petrol. The Dangote refinery is expected to save the country from all those costs.
We are burning about 100 billion naira every month, subsidizing petroleum products, PMS. It's just it can't support that. I can't put any reasoning behind this expenditure and denying state governments money that they need to develop their local economies.
If you save 5% of your imports, save another 30% in petroleum products, and then even fertilizer, that is almost maybe around 2 to 3%, we're moving close to saving about 40% foreign exchange import for the country.
The Nigerian government is in talks with Dangote to acquire a 20% stake in the project. That is partly expected to guarantee crude supply to the refinery from the Nigerian National Petroleum Company. The government is also working to fix all of its 4 refineries and get them all running. If everything works out fine, Nigeria will soon be a major exporter of refined petroleum products. Deji Badmosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Always staying on that issue of energy, and as various countries in Africa attempt to curb the spread of COVID infections, some of those measures are having staggering effects in supply chains on the continent. In Uganda, for instance, it's reported that a buildup of petroleum trucks at the border with Kenya has caused a spike in gasoline prices by almost 50%. Uganda says mandatory COVID-19 tests at entry border points introduced at the beginning of the year have resulted in an enormous backlog, which is now holding the trucks for about 10 days in a queue. Previously, Uganda had allowed drivers entry with negative COVID results for tests taken elsewhere. Gasoline prices in the capital, Kampala, have jumped to as much as 6,630 shillings, about $1.88 per litre, and that's up from about 4,480 shillings. Meanwhile, over in East Africa's largest economy, Kenya's shilling continues to feel the pressure as the dollar strengthens. Investors surveyed say they anticipate the country's central bank to increase the interest rate. In forex trade, Kenya's currency fell to 113.6 shillings against the dollar on Monday. It was the weakest on record. In a bid to strengthen the shilling, the central bank offered 10 billion shillings, that's almost $90 million of 7-day term auction deposits on Monday. However, currency experts say the shilling may continue to feel the heat due to reduced inflows from exports, the market continuing to bet on the US dollar gaining, as well as elevated global oil prices. Economists say they expect a rate hike in Kenya as early as the end of the quarter. Well, environmentalists are warning that Kenya's capital city, Nairobi, could face environmental and food supply challenges in the near future. And that's due to increased real estate development in neighboring regions that previously used to have vast tracts of farmland. The Kiambu region that borders Nairobi is one of them and has been seeing more of its farms turned into homes by developers cashing in on increased demand for housing. CGTN's Enoch Sikolia brings us that report.
Situated about 14 kilometers away from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, is the town of Kiambu and its environs. Kiambu County, as the devolved administrative unit is known locally, was once one of the country's leading agricultural zones, but that is slowly changing. Nairobi City has been growing and expanding into neighboring counties like Kiambu County, where we are now. Traditionally, Kiambu has been a food-producing zone, but the expansion of Kenya's capital city has seen farmlands here converted into real estate. This road is Nairobi's northern bypass, a major link road meant to ease traffic congestion into and out of the Kenyan capital. It's also the geographical border between Nairobi and Kiambu. During the road's construction between 2009 and 2014, it meandered through coffee farms, but several years down the line, only pockets of these farms can be seen as residential areas emerge, and construction work continues.
People have gone into those traditionally food baskets to get somewhere to put up their shelter. This is where land is cheaper, and it's cheaper because there is plenty of it, because these coffee estates are in 100 hectares and above.
Francis Ngige has been a laborer on this farm in Kiambu County since the year 2000. He has seen much of the central Kenyan region's farmlands disappear. Right in front of him, the new owner of his former farm is putting up commercial structures. The latest one is a fuel station.
The people I knew left. I don't know these new ones.
Nancy Githaiga, an environmentalist and the African Wildlife Foundation's country director, says Kenya is losing an important food production zone to urban development, and the impact of this could be felt soon.
These people require settlements, but do we necessarily need to live in these high agricultural areas? Could we have better planning? So there are many areas we could use for settlements if only there was proper planning. Then what is usable for agriculture needs to be left for agriculture. What is for water recharge, groundwater recharge, very, very important, also is required to be left open.
It is this environmental function of the green Kiambu areas to the capital city that worries her. She says if these areas disappear completely, the impact could be catastrophic.
Some countries would drill boreholes not to get water out of the ground but to recharge. So is that the direction we want to take for Nairobi? Or do we want to safeguard what is naturally recharge areas?
Production of some of these farmlands have gone down. Yeah, basically to increased cost of imports and many other factors. So these people want to have an investment that is better.
Nancy says that due to population increase in Nairobi, the expansion of the capital city should be done in areas that are less suitable for farming, while ensuring agriculture continues to thrive in the neighboring productive regions. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Kiambu, Kenya.
Well, over in South Africa, new motor vehicle sales sector rebounded from the COVID-19 market-induced collapse in 2020. It's now expected to grow by 8% in 2022. Angela Coppola now reports from Johannesburg.
The Automotive Business Council says it's fairly confident of reaching that projected 8% growth rate. But it's got to convince people to stop buying second-hand cars and buy new cars instead. And then there's the interest rate environment.
For South Africans, particularly your blue-collar workers, buying a vehicle in the country is the second biggest investment for them. Interest rates play a very critical role because they use their disposable income in order for them to be able to buy those brand new vehicles.
In 2020, the export of vehicles and automotive components was valued at $11 billion, or about 13.9% of South Africa's total exports.
So there's certainly prospect for what I would call recovery, ongoing recovery, if you look at the way vehicle sales have performed over the COVID period. I think the greater challenge is from an import perspective. You have supply chain constraints, and you have constant, this is a permanent feature of the South African landscape, currency volatility.
Economists aren't convinced that the motor vehicle sector will reach that growth rate.
They are going to get growth, but it'll be closer to 5% rather than 8%. I'll tell you why. The South African economy is only forecast to grow 2% or below. And under those circumstances, it's difficult to see how we get to 5% growth in the motor vehicle industry even. But 8% particularly will be very, very difficult.
The export market is a major part of the South African motor vehicle market, accounting for 64% of total production.
We need to be able to make sure that our supply chain challenges that we've had, particularly in 2021 and also in 2020, are fixed and managed very systematically and very quickly.
The African Continental Free Trade Area is a potential market for South African manufactured vehicles, but there's scope to do things differently.
It's this clustering component where you have supported and related industries clustering around each other that builds this manufacturing base. And that's where the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, has the greatest prospect.
There's no question that the sector is important. The manufacturing component employs around 110,000 people, while its multiplier effect has created 457,000 formal jobs. The question is whether it can take advantage of the opportunities on the continent. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's now take a look at some company news. South Africa's low-cost airline Mango's business rescue practitioner says that none of the potential investors expressed an interest in the airline have provided an acceptable form of proof of funding. They've now been given more time to comply. If no suitable buyer is found, Mango could face liquidation. The airline went into voluntary business rescue at the end of July 2021 and has not flown since. It owes over $180 million to creditors. Liverpool-based SPS Sportsoft Limited, the company offering technology support services to sports pesa betting firms, sunk into a $5.5 million loss in the year ended December 2020. The loss came after its single largest client, Kenya-based Pivens East Africa, ceased operations in 2019. The Kenyan government declined to renew its operating license, citing unpaid taxes in excess of $130 million. The United Arab Emirates have removed 5 African countries from the travel restriction red list. The countries are Ghana, Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire. It, however, left Kenya out, which has since extended its retaliatory ban on all passenger flights from the UAE imposed on January the 17th by one more week. The UAE first suspended passenger flights from Kenya in December over alleged fake COVID-19 test results. And finally, Toyota says that it is no longer expecting to meet its annual production target, with operations hampered by the global chip crunch. The Japanese car maker now expects global production to come in under the 9 million vehicle target for its fiscal year to March the 31st. It's the second time this fiscal year that Toyota has dialed down its company-wide production figure. And those were your corporate headlines. Let's now take a short break and return. More coming up in global business, including concern in Tanzania over the government's pace of borrowing, and Egypt seeks ways to convert its massive informal sector into the mainstream economy.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business. Egypt is seeking to formalize its massive informal economy, which constitutes 50% of its workforce. Data from the International Monetary Fund shows that the informal economy is at its highest in African and Latin American countries, where it accounts for an average of 40% of the total economy. As Yasser Hakim now reports, authorities in Cairo have introduced incentives to encourage people to join the formal sector of the economy.
State Statistics Agency CAPMAS says Egypt has relatively the largest informal sector in the Middle East and North Africa, accounting for about 34.5% of the total economy and employing over half the total workforce in the country.
The informal sector accounts for about 2 to 4 trillion Egyptian pounds, which is about 60% of Egypt's budget. It's a burden, as this segment's tax evasion is estimated at about 1.4 trillion Egyptian pounds annually because of the fear from the complicated tax system, and this puts a strain on the economy and curtails development efforts.
Having a large shadow economy also opens the door for illegal activity, such as child labor, money laundering, and drug trafficking. That is why the government has set up a new plan to encourage thousands of medium and small enterprises to move from the shadow economy to the formal sector. Wala Goma is one of those targeted segments. She established her small outlet that sells clothes and female accessories produced by women in their homes or small workshops.
We started with a small workshop, me and 5 other women. Now we have a store and the workshop is growing. I learned from an NGO initiative how to produce leather products like small bags and wallets. We advertise for free using social media through relatives and friends, and we're planning to expand and export abroad.
The ladies produce small amounts with their limited capabilities. Paying taxes and fees will cut into the minute profits they make. But the government's plan is to attract such businesses with promises of growth.
We cannot force these businesses to merge into the economy, so the government has offered incentives such as facilitating the issuance of licenses, consultancy services, easier access to bank accounts, offering low-interest long-term loans, and fintech services like mobile wallets to transfer money or take instant loans. The state also provides tax incentives or even tax exemptions, in some cases to encourage these small businesses to merge into small financial system.
Wale and her partners are now registering their small project after the latest incentives.
All women face a tough problem that we need to spend from the profit on advertisements on social media to grow, but it's a bit costly. These are housewives who cannot afford to pay out from the small income they make. The project is from our own capital, as we are unable to get loans from the state. But now that we are going formal, we will apply for loans.
This is all part of a comprehensive Sustained Development Goals strategy by the North African country to eradicate the shadow economy by 2030. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's head over to West Africa, where it's been a week since ECOWAS imposed extensive economic sanctions on Mali. The landlocked country relies on its neighbors for international trade. CGTN's Astatal now takes a look at how Malians are coping with the embargo.
Previous ECOWAS sanctions had targeted members of the ruling junta and their families. But the sanctions imposed on the 9th of January threatened to directly impact the country's economy. The restrictions have also affected travel, with ECOWAS member countries except Guinea closing their borders with Mali.
Mali is under embargo, and that's not good for us. We have a huge problem getting people into the sub-region. The Ivorians, Senegalese, and several other nationals from the sub-region were stuck here. They can't go home because the borders are closed. You see, the ECOWAS sanctions have not only a negative impact on the Malian people, but also on the populations of the sub-region.
ECOWAS sanctions, however, do not target critical consumer goods. These include fuel, medicine, food, and supplies for COVID-19 response. It, however, effectively freezes Mali's assets in commercial banks.
ECOWAS could have simply frozen the assets of the members of the National Transitional Council, but extending sanctions to the state of Mali means the ECOWAS wants to prevent the payment of Malian civil servants. When we prevent the payment of civil servants, it is as if it is the people as a whole that we have decided to sanction. Yet ECOWAS says the sanctions are not meant to hit the people of Mali, but rather its authorities. Freezing Mali's assets also means punishing private companies because the banks will not be able to meet the needs of these companies.
The regional body has defended the sanctions, deeming them necessary after Mali's military junta failed to meet the February deadline to hold elections. The military junta instead announced a 5-year extension. In addition to the ECOWAS embargo, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says the body will fall in line with the regional body's sanctions on Mali. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, on to Tanzania now, where data from the central bank shows that the national debt stood at $36 billion by the end of November last year, up $5.3 billion year on year. External debt closed at just under $28 billion, an almost $216 million drop from October. The regulator attributed this to debt servicing payments outweighing disbursements during the month. However, debt was still higher by $4.1 billion compared with November of 2020. According to BOT, debt service payments in November amounted to just over 171 million. 114.2 million of that was in the form of principal repayments, while the rest represented interest. The government continued to dominate the external debt by borrower category, accounting for 73.4%, with debt to multilateral institutions accounting for the largest share at 44.1%, followed by commercial creditors at 34%. Well, Tanzania and Burundi have signed an agreement to build a railway that will connect the two nations at a cost of around $900 million. The railway is the final part of a 2,561-kilometer standard gauge railway network that is being built by Tanzania to boost trade in the region. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has more.
The 282-kilometer long railway line will connect Tanzania's northwestern town of Uvinza and the capital city of Gitega in central Burundi. A 156-kilometer section will be built in Tanzania, with the remaining stretch built in Burundi. Once complete, over 1 million tons of cargo and around 3 million tons of minerals are expected to be transported on the line every year. The line will help Tanzania's other landlocked neighbors like Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo to get easier access to the port of Dar es Salaam. Following the signing of the agreement to build the line, the next few months will be spent looking for a suitable contractor to execute the project. Financing for the construction remains a challenge, but both governments say they are confident in their ability to secure funding for the project. Last month, Tanzania signed an agreement with Turkish construction company Yapı Merkezi to begin work on a 368-kilometer section of the same railway line at a cost of $1.9 billion. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Let's head over to Tunisia's agri-sector, where fruit exports grew by 78% in value to reach $46 million last year compared to the same period in 2020. According to data released by Tunisia's interprofessional fruit grouping, volume of exports jumped 64% during the year to 48,000 tons. From Tunis, here's Adnan Chouachi with more on that report.
Tunisian experts say that recent data shows that the strategy of the Agriculture and Trade departments is successful, despite the challenges facing fruit producers and exporting companies since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country in March 2020.
It's a record fruit harvest with 48,600 tons compared to 2021 season when we recorded just 29,000 tons. It's a very important increase in volume by around 64%. This season and the previous one were characterized by an exceptional health situation, which impacted the export operation. Yet, we've managed to achieve very good results.
The interprofessional fruit grouping announced that Tunisia's fruit exports are up in value and quality in 2021. The Gabon region in the north of the country is now the main exporter of Maltese oranges in the Mediterranean basin.
France is the main destination for Tunisia's fruit exports, and like other fruits, Maltese oranges are a purely Tunisian product. It's only produced in our country. We exported 11,000 tons to the French market as well as 6,000 tons to Libya, which is an important market for citrus and fruits.
Members of the Tunisian Union of Agriculture and Fisheries explained that the state aims to increase its revenue in foreign exchange by promoting exports. Therefore, it's necessary to boost production by offering financial and technical support for local farmers.
The state needs to support fruit farmers while providing modern logistics to export the products to new markets, which could buy 100% of Tunisian high-quality fruits.
In May 2021, the Tunisian-Libyan land border crossing reopened and trade returned back to its peak, allowing fruit producers to export to Libya at a reasonable cost. Tunisia aims to export about 90,000 tons of fruit in 2022, mainly to neighboring Libya, which accounts for about 75 to 80% of Tunisian yields. The interprofessional fruit grouping says that steep air freight costs represent up to 45% of sales price and could restrict Tunisia's fruit exports in the future. Players in the industry urge the Agriculture, Trade and Transport departments to reduce the high transport fees in order to make Tunisian fruits more competitive. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Chinese citizens living and working on Tonga's main island are safe. Chinese Ambassador Cao Shaolin told CGTN in a phone interview on the situation of Chinese citizens in Tonga.
After the eruption of the volcano, the Chinese embassy immediately activated the contingency plan, strengthened communications with relevant departments of the Tongan government, and made every effort to protect the safety of Chinese citizens in Tonga. There are more than 1,000 Chinese citizens on Tonga's main island. For now, they are all safe. As communication between Tonga and the outside world has been cut off, we also asked the Tongan government to help us to investigate the situation of Chinese citizens on the other islands. In the past few days, the staff of the Chinese embassy visited some of the families of Chinese citizens who were seriously affected by the disaster and provided necessary assistance.
Let's now take a short break. More coming up in global business, including the UN Secretary General calls on business leaders to help poor nations access COVID-19 vaccines and combat climate change. And India's Prime Minister calls for a global approach to regulate cryptocurrencies.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives, from the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Let's now take a recap at news making headlines this hour. At least 4 people were killed and 10 others injured in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, on Tuesday after a suicide bomber detonated explosives in a tea shop just outside a military base. The base outside which the blast occurred is located near a Turkish military garrison, which helps to train Somali troops. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the blast, but the Islamist group Al-Shabaab frequently carries out bombings and gun assaults in Mogadishu and elsewhere in Somalia. And in some other news we've been following, the chairman of Sudan's Transitional Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has ordered the establishment of a committee to probe Monday's clashes between street protesters and security forces, which resulted in the deaths of 7 protesters. Protests against military rule have been ongoing in parts of the country. General Burhan ordered the probe. Well, further afield in Tonga, the government says Saturday's volcano eruption and tsunami caused an unprecedented disaster in the country. Only 3 people have been confirmed dead so far, including 2 locals and a British national. But the government says all houses on Mango Island have been destroyed. Other islands suffered extensive damage. Evacuations are still underway. The tsunami reached Pacific coastlines from Japan to the United States. And that was a recap of stories making headlines this hour. Well, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has appealed to business leaders to support developing countries in their hour of need with access to COVID-19 vaccines to help combat the climate crisis and reform the global financial system. Speaking virtually to the World Economic Forum Davos conference, Guterres warned of a lopsided recovery from the COVID-19 with low-income countries at a huge disadvantage. Guterres has long been pushing for more global action to address COVID-19 vaccine inequity, climate change, and for reform of the financial system.
Let's not go into a blame and shame. Let's assist, help key emerging economies to accelerate the transition. And I'm calling for the creation of coalitions with countries, governments, public and private financial institutions, investment funds, and companies that have the technological know-how to provide targeted financial and technical support for every country that needs assistance. Low-income countries are at a huge disadvantage. They are experiencing their slowest growth in a generation and trying to dig themselves out with woefully insufficient national budgets.
In the meantime, prices of almost all major cryptocurrencies were trading with heavy losses on Tuesday after India's Prime Minister called for synchronized global action to regulate cryptocurrencies. The global crypto market cap was down by 2.25% at just over $2 trillion, while the crypto trading volume surged by 19.9% at 76.9. Narendra Modi made the remarks at the World Economic Forum's virtual Davos Agenda Conference. He compared the digital currency to inflation and climate change. He also pitched India as the most attractive investment destination, emphasizing the country's commitment to deep economic reform.
Disruption of supply chains, inflation and climate change are examples of these challenges. Another example is cryptocurrency. Given the kind of technology this is based on, decisions taken by a single country are not going to be enough to resolve challenges related to it. We need to adopt a uniform approach to it. Big reforms have been carried out in India in the area of outdated telecom regulations related to information technology and business process outsourcing sectors. Friends, India is committed to becoming a trusted partner for the world in the area of global supply chain. We are working with several countries on creating a path to free trade agreement with them.
Well, key sessions at this year's World Economic Forum are to cover the fourth industrial revolution, energy transition, climate concerns, COVID-19, as well as sustainable development and the global economic outlook. That's according to WEF, which says the event is focused on driving concerted action among key stakeholders. To discuss that drive for global cooperation while individual countries grapple with the domestic carnage caused by COVID-19, we're joined by economics professor Yan Liang. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Let's just start there, Professor. Individual countries facing many domestic challenges despite calls for global cooperation on various issues that we're hearing from various organizations. How likely is it that countries will actually heed this call?
Thank you for having me on, Hannah. It's great to talk to you. So I think what is clear is that the world is living through all these different crises, and all these crises are global in nature, be it pandemic or economic recovery or climate change. So none of the countries can stand alone and handle all these crises single-handedly. So I think countries realize that they have to work together. Take pandemic, we cannot leave any countries out, otherwise variants will grow and they will spread. And take climate change, no other countries can just slow down the temperature rising unless all countries share commitments and resources together. And economic crises as well. Every 26 hours, we have one new billionaire in the world. And yet the world population that live below poverty increased by 100 million since the starting of the pandemic. So I think all of these challenges are global in nature. And it's in the interest of these countries to work together. Indeed, this year's theme is working together, restoring trust. So I think countries must work together and take this coordinated multi-stakeholder approach, as Zafedi, the managing director of the WEF, called for.
Professor, there is that saying that we hear that when many things are prioritized, nothing really is. With all the various subject matters to be discussed at this year's World Economic Forum, as important as they all are, if you could pick one issue you felt was most urgent to address, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the sobering reality is that we are living through multiple crises. But if I have to make a pick, I would say controlling and containing the virus, the pandemic, so then people don't have to choose between lives and livelihood, so then they can focus on economic recovery and fighting climate change. And I think one of the biggest obstacles right now is that vaccine divide, where 70% of advanced countries have already vaccinated more than 40% of the population. And Africa, for example, only fully vaccinated about 6% of the population. So I think we really need to work together to increase to improve the access to vaccines, to mass testing, to medical resources and knowledge sharing, so that we'll be able to keep the pandemic under control. And at the same time, because the pandemic serves as a reset, so we really need to think about how to restructure our economic life towards a more sustainable future.
Professor, when it comes to economic recovery, what is your outlook for 2022?
Unfortunately, I think that uneven recovery is probably the path where the world is going towards. So we will have the United States probably recovering quite smoothly, unless the interest rate hikes is going to put a dampening effect on the economy. China is also projected to grow in a healthy and stable way. So I think the great majority of the countries are struggling with economic growth and recovery. What it really needs to happen is coordinated approach, like President Xi was talking about, restoring that multilateral system, improve digital economy for many of these less developed countries, and also to provide help, provide assistance, provide technological support, provide resource sharing, so then all countries can recover their economies in a synchronized way.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us. That was Professor Yan Liang, and she is an economics professor. Well, China and the United States signed a Phase 1 trade deal in January of 2020 in hopes of ending a damaging trade war. Wang Swin got the views of some economists on its impact after 2 years and where the sides can go from here.
An important event for the world's two largest economies. 2 years ago, China and the U.S. signed a Phase 1 trade agreement covering intellectual property, technology transfers, food, and financial services.
几乎在这个同时，那这个疫情
It pretty much coincided with the outbreak of COVID-19 and it spread around the world, affecting many countries' trade and economy. It also affected the trade deal, but China has honored its words with real actions and tried its best to increase its purchases.
Under the agreement, China agreed to increase the value of the imports of American goods and services by at least $200 billion over 2 years from 2017 levels, including $32 billion in farm products. The U.S. promised to cut some tariffs on Chinese goods.
那拜登政府提出了3条。
In general, the Biden administration has 3 strategies for China: cooperate, compete, and confront. Biden's attitude is also reflected in the U.S. Trade Representative's performance. Catherine Tai has remarked on U.S. trade policies on China and the recoupling of the U.S. and Chinese economies.
In 2020, China was the U.S. third largest export market. U.S. goods exports to China were $124 billion, up 17% from the year before. At the same time, U.S. imports from China totaled $434 billion in 2020, down 3.6% from the year before.
From a historical point of view, the second phase will be carried out, and it should be carried out. Personally, I think it will not be very hard. It will be relatively smooth, as the two countries have common interests and concerns.
After 2 years of implementation and efforts from both countries, questions linger as to enforcement, as well as the deal's future. Wang Sun, CGTN, Beijing.
In arts and entertainment, just months after Broadway reopened, at least 13 shows have closed for good or been forced to go on hiatus because of a spike in COVID-19 cases. Illness among cast members and falling audience numbers have left some of New York's theaters losing money. Nearly 2 years after the start of the outbreak, those involved in the city's arts industry are increasingly concerned about their future. Sarah Walton reports.
Ain't Too Proud, the Tony Award-winning musical about the life and times of the vocal group The Temptations, has become the latest show to take a final bow on Broadway. After going on hiatus in December, the cast reunited for their closing performance on Sunday. The difficulty of running a show during the pandemic making it impossible to stay open.
30 to 40% of all the plays on Broadway have either closed or gone on hiatus. And the principal reason is simply safety. Also, you have to have the audience. Tourism is down in New York. 65% of all the people that come to Broadway plays are people from outside of New York.
Waitress, Thoughts of a Coloured Man and Jagged Little Pill have all closed for good. Others, such as Mrs. Doubtfire and Girl from the North Country, have suspended performances until the spring. But some of the city's biggest spectacles are persevering, having introduced strict COVID-19 protocols. At Phantom of the Opera, Broadway's longest-running musical, a huge effort is underway to keep the show going.
But right now we are rehearsing non-stop. Sometimes during the show, we'll send someone to go off to a studio to rehearse because as people, if they become infected with COVID, then they are kind of out of the picture for 10 days. And the testing is incredibly rigorous. I mean, we are testing every day and sometimes twice a day. If it's a day off, we take an antigen test in the morning at home, and we take a PCR test when we come here at the theater. And it's constantly evolving.
March will mark 2 years since Broadway went dark during the COVID-19 lockdown. Despite reopening in September last year, the continued disruption being caused by the virus has left many in the industry facing an uncertain future.
Everyone I've spoken to has felt like this is a new kind of purgatory, where we are in what feels like March 2020, where we're dealing with a brand new virus and things are shutting down again. But also we have information and we know how to deal with things. So we're still planning to do things that we don't know if they're going to be able to happen or not, or if we'll have to transition to digital media.
In an effort to keep people safe, the Broadway League is extending the mask-wearing requirement for theatre-goers until the end of April. And the current vaccine mandate for audiences is being widened to include children over the age of 5 from January the 29th.
Meanwhile, performers are hoping the current Omicron spike will be short-lived and that no more Broadway shows will face the final curtain. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
Another look at the markets. Let's take a look at how commodities fared. As we mentioned earlier, that oil price continuing its upward surge. However, as other asset classes gain investor confidence, gold continues to lose its lure. Despite market uncertainty, gold was down almost 0.2%. Let's now take a look at what's coming up still. Cairo's stray cats get a warm winter thanks to a caring entrepreneur.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
And now for one of those stories that pulls at your heartstrings. A recycling enthusiast in Egypt's Cairo is manufacturing mobile shelters for upcycled tires to keep stray cats warm during winter. Ibrahim Abogendi is hoping goodwill from other Egyptians will keep many of Cairo's strays sheltered. Let's have a look.
Cairo felines have a warm place to sleep in these upcycled mobile shelters made out of old tires, which will protect the animals during the cold winter months. Eco-friendly artist Ibrahim Abogendi is creating these prototypes to be distributed in various locations in the busy streets of Cairo. This as Egypt has been witnessing changing weather conditions in recent years.
They live in very difficult conditions. As we can see, there is snowfall and heavy rainfall in Egypt as a result of climate change. We have seen snowfall in Hurghada and Alexandria, and we are trying to be one step ahead of the stray animals who are at risk because of changes in the weather. They need to be protected from the temperature. Even 10 degrees warmer will make a huge difference for them.
Abogendi, a founder of the eco-friendly design house Mobikia, is cooperating with Petman, an e-commerce store for pets, as part of the Shelter project. The mobile shelters are designed to fit in an urban setting, made of upcycled car tires, as well as other recycled material like wood.
With this design, we can say that we have offered a safe and thermally insulated shelter that can accommodate 5 cats. Its size is not too big to put in front of your house. This is the simple prototype. We can add more options, including how to put food for them that can be distributed equally to the 5 cells so that the cats don't fight with each other. These will all be based on the feedback that we will get from the cats themselves, people in the streets, and those who will help us by keeping these units on the spaces that belong to them.
Users can order the units or donate to manufacture them to be put in streets. Donations from outside Egypt are also accepted through the project's website. Rare snowstorms have been hitting the coastal cities of Hurghada and Alexandria this winter, with Egyptians reporting lower temperatures in Cairo and other cities in recent years. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, over in Zimbabwe, a growing number of women are breaking barriers to become tour guides and game rangers in a field that is largely dominated by men. Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Authority is pushing for changes to end the underrepresentation and change the face of the industry. Farai Makatuya brings us that story.
Sarudzai Muzinde and Catherine Washaya begin another day at the Lake Chivero Game Park, where they show off the wildlife to visitors and stand guard over it.
Patrolling the wilderness at all hours of the day and night. It's obviously very hard work, but I'm sure there are things you love and enjoy about this job. What are some of the best parts of the work that you do?
One of the best that I can say I actually enjoy doing this work is that, first of all, there's something that I've always wanted. I've already admired people in the bush. I like this natural environment, the God-given, nothing added to it. And me as a woman, I enjoy being part of that, being in charge, making sure no one is taking anything from it. And try me, no one will take anything while I'm standing.
That reveals the intent with which authorities are looking after this priceless heritage.
There's been a significant reduction in the numbers of wildlife lost to poachers here over the last few years. Zimbabwe's conservation effort has been so effective, it has started reintroducing some endangered species like black rhino into game parks where they had previously been completely wiped out.
The National Parks and Wildlife Management Authority aims to consolidate the gains by making conservation more inclusive.
About 5 years ago, it was 90 versus 10 because most of our officers were male, and it's a male-dominated industry. But over the last 3 years, we've increased the percentage of women to about 20, and we continue to do that.
Female enrollment in training schools has increased to 40% as the authority encourages more young women to take up a job where emotions are stretched to extremes.
It's exciting to teach people who may be ignorant about our wildlife to know more. It's dangerous, especially when encountering armed poachers, because it's your life or theirs. It's also painful when an animal dies. It feels like losing a child that I was taking care of.
She hopes the losses are minimized as more women sign up for duty. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Lake Chivero, Zimbabwe.
And now for a final look at the markets in Forex trade. That dollar strength really hurting many emerging market currencies. A jump in U.S. Treasury yields pushed the dollar index to a 6-day high on Tuesday. What's interesting, though, is Kenya's shilling, which has been under tremendous pressure recently, gained some slight momentum against the dollar, ticking up slightly compared to yesterday. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business. Remember that you can send your feedback to contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. From me, Hannah Viviers, and the rest of the Global Business team, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.